trying to beat everybody else's high score, and or trying to be the first to master a new game that it just came out nobody saw before. And you couldn't go home and practice that game either. You had to go there and you had to spend your time and you had to spend your quarters.
This is the Game Industry Events Podcast by Events for Gamers, one of the only exclusive game industry event calendars covering global industry events and knowledgeable event attendees like my guest today. I am the CEO and founder of Events for Gamers, Mathew Anderson. Joining me today is Scott Patterson. Scott is a small business owner, arcade repair tech enthusiast, and must love movies like Indiana Jones because he's also a treasure hunter. Hey Scott, how are you? And have you found any interesting treasure lately?
Oh, I'm always finding a few things here and there. The arcade repair stuff's kept me pretty busy lately, so I haven't really got to go treasure hunting too much. But it's always a call away.
Oh, nice.
So you never know what you're gonna find when you do get a call like that. So I'm waiting for that next one right now.
So you do a lot of stuff in the industry for your own hobbies and a mix of very interesting things as we were talking about. And I love to ask you, because this show, Events for Gamers podcast, is about events in the game industry. We usually have a little bit of a sprinkling of that sort of chit chat somewhere in the show, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But just as a general for everybody, what have you done in the game industry?
Well, I've always loved this stuff. I played my first video game, which was a Pac-Man machine, all the way back in 1981. So I'm dating myself a little. I was young then, but not quite as young now, of course. I turned 50 this year.
Congrats.
But well, yeah, I'm not there yet, but I am excited about it. So this felt like it, when I was younger, like it would be older than it feels now, right? But that's cool. That's cool. I like it for that, because now I finally figured out what the heck's going on in the world. But no, I've always loved this stuff. And I always loved the video gaming more than just the games themselves. I wanted to know, who made these things? What kind of industry impact did they have? What kind of media did they get around them? How did they make them? All that sort of thing. And so that eventually led me to, I've worn so many hats in the industry. I've done arcade repair in the past. I'm back to doing that again now, which started as a hobby. But I've spoken at conventions over the years. I've been published in magazines and books and online websites. I've worked with G4 TV when that was a thing. Quite a few things, whichever way the wind kind of blew at the time. And, the common theme is, I just love games, and I always have. And I love talking about them, and I love the history and the culture that surrounds it all, and the impact it's had on all of pop culture, arts and entertainment at this point.
Yeah, that's a huge theme for you, is that pop culture, and I love learning about it. I love going to these conventions. There's one here in the area, Comic Palooza, and it has a huge mix of anime and comics and pop culture of degree, but there's other events like that. We'll get into those later. I'm getting ahead of myself here. See how I already I push the events to the forefront immediately.
I appeared at a Comic Palooza one time. Oh. I had a good time down there too. It was right, like you're speaking about. It was a varied event, which is something I actually kind of like with that sort of thing, because there's nothing wrong with the events that are just board games or just anime or just video games. There's nothing wrong with those events. Obviously, they're awesome and they're wonderful, but to me, all this stuff kind of goes hand in hand. It's all part of this big, wonderful tapestry. And so I always had more fun appearing at the events that kind of encompassed all of that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of events you go to, not necessarily for the products or the event itself, but to meet other people, right? And this is something that I wanted to get into with you, because I know that you've met so many interesting people across the spectrum with, going to events and just out on the street and elsewhere with your hobbies. One of the interesting hobbies I wanted to touch upon that we talked about briefly before was wrestling. You wrestle, right?
Down here in the Texas territory, starting back in 98. See, I'm not that old. 1998, which still sounds really old at this point. But yeah, I just one of those things I grew up watching and loving. And I was a crazy enough kid that, sat down one time and would tell everybody, one day I'm going to do this and one day I'm going to do that. One of the things I said I was going to do was be a pro wrestler. And nobody thought that was ever going to happen, but I did it. And I'm proud of having done it. And so from 1998 to around 2008, a big variety of companies all throughout the state of Texas, which is a very big state. If I was up in the Northeast, that would have been, a 20 state, range. But I also did go to other states as well as, Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, Montana, Louisiana, Arkansas. I wrestled a bunch of those states as well. And it's funny though, because, you start with that. And I think it's a good place to start because that was like probably that first real lofty thing that I did do in my life. That big thing to where, nobody, not my parents, not my friends, not the people who weren't my friends growing up. Everybody was kind of like, yeah, rolled their eyes. Yeah, sure. You're going to do that someday. Uh-huh. And, went in there and it took a while, but eventually I got over and I main evented and I held championships and sold merchandise and did all these things that, nobody else thought possible, but it was something I decided I was going to go do. And the things I learned by doing that have parlayed into everything else I've done since.
That's what I love about the game industry, and it's meeting those people. And obviously with wrestling, you're meeting people real, upfront and personable, getting to know them. And I'm sure that we could have a podcast just about wrestling and how cool of a show that is. But these sort of events of a personal nature, you're going somewhere to meet somebody or to watch somebody. That's really cool because you are connecting with people around you, but also you're in a way connecting with the people on stage or on in wrestling, what is it? The ring, right? Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
You're connecting with those people too. And I'm sure that those people are also in the ring. You in the ring is also connected to the people watching, right? You're not just, you're obviously focused on the person you're fighting, but you still have a connection with everybody else, right?
Well, that's the whole point, professional wrestling and nowadays, the secret's out now, come on, everybody talks about it openly now, which I know some old schoolers dislike that, but I think it comes with the benefits. Professional wrestling is really kind of, it's performance art, it's theater at its most base. And it's not so much about the moves you do in the ring. There's some people in the industry, there's some people who watch the industry that think that that's the main thing that matters or the main thing that should matter. The main thing that matters in that is the same as any other form of arts or entertainment. Are the people who've bought tickets to come out and watch that show, are they being entertained? Are the people tuning in to watch it on television, are they being entertained? Are you connecting with that audience, whether you're supposed to be cheered, whether you're supposed to be booed, whether you're supposed to wow them, whether you're supposed to, make them concerned or excited or sad or whatever. And it's something, it's challenge to go do that. And I don't think professional wrestling gets enough credit for that because when it's good, when people find a way to connect with that audience and get an emotional reaction from that audience, they all know it's a show now. Just like going to a movie theater, nobody thinks that Batman is real.
Wait,
but
he isn't? Whoa.
But they get it, but to get them invested in that storyline and that character in those moments, yeah, that's literally the entire point of the professional wrestling industry, and it spills over to all their arts and entertainment. If you're not connecting with your audience, you're not getting it right.
Yeah, and I think connecting with the audience, you hit a point there, and you also hit a point with Batman. One of my personal heroes is Batman, so I'm very down right now about what you just said, sir. So is Santa Claus, but I digress. So these people that you watch, you really cheer, whether it's a one-on-one wrestling match or a huge stadium with 100 players, 100 dancers in the center, or whatever it is. You develop some personal heroes through that. So you have some personal heroes, I hear, and speak about some of those. So why do you put so much importance on meeting your personal heroes?
Well, so to pull back the curtain a little bit on me personally, because you kind of nailed the question and framed the question in a way that not a lot of people do when they ask me about this. But so long story short, I didn't have a great family atmosphere growing up. I was the only child to two parents who mostly fought, and I won't deep dive into that too much. I want to keep this thing light and positive, but you don't really have, I didn't really have that kind of parental support. I mean, I had the tangible stuff. I always had plenty to eat and a roof over my head and electricity and, clothes on my back. I had that kind of support, but I didn't have the kind of support that, a kid kind of needs growing up, as far as my passions or, hey, you want to do this? Let's help you figure out how to do this. Or, hey, you can do this or do anything. I never had any of that. So when you're a kid, you have to have that. And so in lieu of getting that from my parents or from any siblings of which I didn't have, or any other adult influences in my life that were willing to step in at that time or recognized the need to do so, it was arts and entertainment that I had to turn to give me that solitude and that inspiration. And so it was about the people who I watched on my TV screen, the people who I watched on a football field or a wrestling ring or in a movie or in a TV show, the people I read about in books and magazines. Those were my sources of inspiration. That was my emotional support growing up in its own way. And so the impact that a lot of people in the arts and entertainment, video games, sports, movies, all of it had on me growing up shaped who I grew up into. So I have, over the last, especially 15, 16 years, really, really, really tried to meet as many of those people, living ones anyway, that I could. And when I did the convention circuit, oh, that opened up the opportunity to do that a lot. I got to meet, Atari co-founder Nolan Bushnell. I got to meet Kevin Eastman. I got to meet Larry Hama. I got to meet Roddy Piper.
Isn't it interesting how some of these people, you would expect them to be too busy, and you're worried about going up and just saying hi to them. And a lot of the times, in the past, I've gone up and said hi to some of my personal heroes, and they said hi back to me, and they were just as friendly as ever, and that warmed my heart.
I think about Roddy Piper mostly when you say that, because I went up and I shook his hand and I said, sir, I've waited however many years it was at the time. I'm not mathing that much at the moment, but however many years it was at the time, I've waited this many years to shake your hand, sir. It's an absolute honor. He was very humble and gracious in response to that. And this is a guy who has, wrestled Hulk Hogan in front of, 93,000, he's performed in front of 93,000 people. There's a guy that wrestled Hulk Hogan and sold out main events. There's a guy that was at one time in the #1 movie in America, for 1 week, but still, I mean, most people never get to say that. And he was very humble and very gracious. And he didn't want to talk about him. He wanted to ask about me. He wanted to know about me. And that was just such not just a thrilling moment, but, kind of a lesson that I carried with me from that, because, he was there to make a personal appearance, but he was doing that. He wanted to talk about the people. He wanted them to talk about themselves, not himself. He knows all about himself, right?
Yeah, those are the best people, aren't they? They really want to hear about those people who they find interesting. And you had listed a lot of people that, some of them I find as personal heroes to a degree too. I don't think as much as, you certainly connect with them, but I recognize the names. And one other name that we had, we were talking a little offline about a lot of these things, and I was trying to get to know more about you. And one of the names that came across was Barrymore.
Yeah, she's on my shirt right now, Drew Barrymore.
Ah,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. That would be, well, that's the one that, I guess you could say got away with the meeting, but it's the way that Catalyst. I had an opportunity at a movie screening back in 2009. I got into an advanced screening for a movie, and they were doing it in Dallas. And a lot of people helped me. The Dallas Derby Devils roller derby team helped me. I had friends help me. get me in legitimately, because it was for Whip It, which was about roller derby. And I had the opportunity, possibly twice, but certainly once, to talk to her, to meet her and talk to her at that event, and I completely froze. I choked. I went completely catatonic. I couldn't form a sentence or much of a thought at that point in time. And so, I didn't like how it felt when I did that though, because those opportunities to meet people like that don't come along often. So that's when I decided, I'm never going to allow myself to miss an opportunity like that again. If I have an opportunity to meet somebody who is an inspiration, someone I admire, I'm a fan of, or whatever, I'm never going to squander that opportunity again because I didn't like how that felt that first time. And so all these meetings that we're talking about and all those opportunities, it was the catalyst from that. So while it was a bummer in real time that I failed to speak to Drew that day, um, if I had, I don't know that I would have had all these other wonderful experiences meeting all these other people and all these other heroes of mine for all these years since. And I feel like I'm better for it in a weird kind of way. I guess it's a positive that came out of a not so positive moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's always somebody who, you're going to look up to. One of the big ones I haven't met yet personally was Patrick Stewart, Captain Picard on Star Trek. And I suspect that I would probably probably choke at the same time there. And that actually makes me think of another character. I was at Comic Palooza. We were just covering that, just talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
And Comic Palooza in Houston, Texas, I was taking a break. I went to the restroom and, I was washing my hands and I looked up in the mirror and I saw right next to me was Jack Harkness, Captain Jack Harkness from Doctor Who, and he plays a couple of other, personalities.
Did you manage to form a sentence?
I didn't. I was like, well, this is,
so you get it.
This is how it went. I looked in the mirror and I went, and he went, and I was like, I played it super cool. I was like, hey, have a great day. Good talk. He was going to a talk and I didn't get his photograph.
Well, to be fair, that was in a bathroom. You probably shouldn't talk to people
Right.
when they're in the bathroom.
Yeah. But he's Jack Harkness. He has a certain style of his own, no matter where he is.
I mean, I've had moments like that where it was, an unexpected encounter, and I won't go into all of those. But sometimes too, I think it's about timing as well. Again, maybe the problem I couldn't speak with Drew that time was because it was in a room full of people, and maybe if I had a direct opportunity someday, I could actually form a sentence. But I've seen situations too, where I've seen somebody who I was a fan of, and maybe they were at a restaurant. I'm not going to go up and bother them at a restaurant. I'm not going to talk to them washing hands in a bathroom, for sure. I saw Dallas Cowboy Daryl Johnston one time. We were at an event. He wasn't appearing there. He just was attending it, but he was playing with his young daughter at the time. And I'm a big Dallas Cowboys fan, and I would love to have gone up and meet him, but I'm not going to interrupt a guy playing with his daughter. Who's going to do that? I wouldn't. I mean, I think, okay, let's be honest. Some people would. I'm not that guy. So sometimes it's about timing. Some of the people I mentioned, for example, I didn't get pictures with them. CM Punk, I met, I talked with him. I didn't try to get a picture with him because he just caught a red eye out of that event and he was exhausted. I just wanted to shake his hand real quick. And then, yeah, because I didn't treat him like a piece of property or, put any demands on him, he actually did want to talk with me for a few minutes. But, I'm not going to bug him for autographs or pictures in that situation. I was just happy to shake his hand and meet him. So
there are a lot of interesting people throughout time as we've grown up, as we've matured, and you have different interests and different people that you want to meet. And I know that's changed for me. I don't know about you, but certainly in the 80s. Now, you know the 80s well. I grew up barely within the 80s, so it was very on the threshold.
Those are my formative years. I was born in 1975.
Okay,
so,
80 years, so not too far apart. But boy, golly, the 80s had some really strange and interesting and wonderful, and every other word you could use, movies, TV shows, and just pop culture shenanigans in general. And we mentioned Comic Palooza and a couple of other events, and I want to ask you a few questions later about that. But first, talking about all these people that really inspire you, what about the gaming side of things, the more non-person oriented, things? You had mentioned arcades earlier. Now, growing up in the 80s, arcades were everywhere. That
Oh,
was really
yeah.
fun, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there were more or I'm sorry, not more arcade games. There was at one point at its peak more video arcades in the United States than there are Starbucks locations now. To put that into perspective, right? Now, it didn't last long. The business model was a little bit flawed. It's, just like any business, too many things pop up too fast. It's not gonna last for the long term. Some people got in to make a quick buck, and with everyone else doing it, there it went. But yeah, the arcade experience back then in the 1980s, it wasn't just about the games. Not that a lot of the games weren't completely wonderful, and a lot of them still are wonderful because they had to make a fun game. They had limited tech, they had a limited budget, they had limited staff.
There's certainly a lot of them that were original and compelling too. One of the ones that I can think of offhand is Tron. Please tell me that there is a secret room behind the arcade machine Tron that leads you actually into the world of Tron.
Not that I'm aware of, and I don't know that I'd want to go in there. I was never very good at that game, so I wouldn't last really, really long in a real world Tron situation at
Yeah,
all.
in case anybody is not sure
But
what we're talking about here, Tron has a real world kind of aspect to the idea, the universe of Tron. And I'm trying to remember the first Tron movie and how it played out, but I know the second Tron movie, without spoiling it too much, real people go into the Tron universe basically.
yeah, I mean, and you talk about the original one, that movie was way ahead of its time too. Talking about, of course, we called them users, computer users back then. They had to label everything. That's a term you hear throughout that movie, and not everybody fully understands it. If you used a computer in the early '80s, they called you a user. So, this they had to try to label everything, I guess, because it was new. But you talk about Tron. It's funny. I just saw some Tron arcade games at an arcade auction a couple days ago. That cabinet itself was a work of art. Almost forget the game inside. The game inside was fun too, but the cabinet itself with all the black lighting and backlit effects was an absolute piece of art. I mean, it really was. And that was part of it back then. It wasn't, I mean, the games are wonderful, like I said, but it wasn't just about the games. It was about the experience of seeing these machines, the cabinets, and all the artwork on them, and then the whole culture around it. Going to a crowded arcade and trying to beat everybody else's high score, or trying to be the first to master a new game that had just came out, nobody saw before. And you couldn't go home and practice that game either. You had to go there and you had to spend your time and you had to spend your quarters. It was an investment in time and effort to go in there and do that. But it was an experience because, you went in there and posted that high score up on the game for that day. Everyone's trying to beat you. Everyone's interacting. Some of them are going to love you and want to know how you play the game. Some aren't going to like you for doing it very much. Either way, it was all fun and something that, I don't know that any level of video gaming has ever fully replicated the same way since.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about arcades, that they didn't seem to be, and maybe I'm watching the wrong movies and TV shows, didn't seem to be in a lot of those 80s TV shows and movies as I expected. The two that I can think of offhand where it had an interesting arcade component would be, I know I'm missing one or two more, but one would be in X-Files. I don't remember the season and episode, but there's one where there's a kid playing and he does some shenanigans. Again, no spoilers, but it's based partly in an arcade. And then also the movie Hackers in 1995. They certainly had some bits in arcade too, which really explored that personable, almost a hero, going back to that slightly, where you are talking about your personal heroes. Hackers seem to have that aspect. The internet was new, just a few years old, and it displayed this individuals in the movie that were rescuing society from the evil corporations. It's kind of how they framed it, and we were going to hack those evil corporations and make the world a better place, and everybody was going to zen out, for the rest of eternity and all that. Didn't quite work like that, obviously, but it had an interesting angle. And I I think that, hackers certainly, showed the arcade in a unique way, because it had that one scene where they were just hanging out talking about the situation of the scenes of the movie. Again, no spoilers here. In the middle of this arcade. So the arcade was, yes, about the arcade and playing the games and all of that, but it also was a meeting place for people back then that didn't have meeting places like we do online, where you had to go somewhere, right?
There was no online yet. There are a few movies you're missing. Maybe you're familiar with them, maybe other people, but The Last Starfighter comes to mind. That's about a guy who gets so good at this arcade game that it turns out the arcade game is a test to try to find a human that can help a real space battle up in space, and they come down and get him. He's a reluctant hero, but he steps up. There was War Games. That's actually one of my favorite, Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy and Dabney Coleman. It was ahead of its time as well, because he's hacking into computers. That movie came out in 1983. Most people didn't even have computers at home yet, much less thinking about being able to hook them up to a phone line and hack into things. But that's what happens in that movie, and I think it's a classic. It still stands the test of time. It shook some people up politically at the time too. There's a lot of history, you can go look into on that. I can think about Cloak and Dagger, although I mean it's sort of loosely tied to video games at the time, but definitely had some involved. It's another early '80s. Also had Dabney Coleman in it. He did a lot of movies back then, though, so I think the odds are pretty good that if movie was in the first half of the '80s, it probably had Dabney Coleman in it. His agent must have been really good at the time. But so yeah, there's quite a few. Of course, you can also watch a lot of TV shows and movies from the '80s, and maybe video games aren't a central point in a lot of them, but you're going to see them in the background in scenes all the time, constantly. If you kind of look for them, drives my wife nuts sometimes. I can watch a TV show and you get like a quick glance of an arcade cabinet will show up in the background somewhere, and 99 times out of 100, I can tell you what the game was, even just that quick blurry glance. And we pause it, and yeah, I'm right. So yeah, I know a little bit on that, but definitely was a culture that I'm glad there's a newer generation through all of these like barcades and stuff that exist now that have these old school games. And of course, you got emulators and you got modern consoles that have these classic game libraries. So I'm glad there's people that these games themselves didn't just fade into obscurity like they felt like they were going to do for quite a long time. But that culture, you had to be there. It's just, you had to be there. I can describe it a million times, but you had to be there for it.
Yeah, it was really special, and something I think we've lost in large part, where now you have online everything, and well, what am I going to do today? I'm going to go online and I'm going to play my games, and I'm going to meet other people online, which is great. That's good. You have access.
It can be fun too, but it's not the same. It's really not the same as that interpersonal contact was.
Yeah, it's its own thing, right? And it has opportunities that you don't get in person. So there is pros and cons there, but we're talking about a lot of really interesting things that I think are literally lost to time. And I think it's a thing. Some of these things like arcade machines, that they're not going to come again, right?
Yeah, I don't think you can fully ever duplicate an era like that. And arcades weren't the only one. I mean, gosh, shopping malls back then. Oh my gosh, they were. You didn't just go there to shop. You went there to do things, and there were things there to do. And music stores back then. Same type of thing. And that was kind of where people would congregate and talk about the latest, new records and stuff that were coming out. You'd listen. The really good ones, you could listen to samples and stuff like that too.
You only get to experience that there. There is no other place to do that. If you go to the movie, you have to go to the movie at that time, and you schedule it with your friends, and it may not show up any other time. You can't rerun it on your Netflix channel.
Oh, shoot. Watching TV back then. You want to watch this, your favorite show comes on Thursday at 7 o'clock. You had to be home at Thursday at 7 o'clock.
No TiVo.
That's it. Yeah, right. Now, later, a little later, here came the VCR, and you could pop a blank tape and program it, hopefully, to, play, tape it for you and watch it later. And that could work too. But that's what it was. Like destination entertainment. It came on at this time. If you missed it, you might never see it, or you might have to wait till summer reruns, or you might have to wait till syndication.
So speaking of destination experiences, let's talk a little bit more about events. All these things, you have to be in person. You have to experience them with other people. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, the game industry and, whether it's arcade still or older generation games or pop culture events. What are some cool industry gathering opportunities that are out there for people that want to experience some of these things we're talking about?
Well, you use the right word, which for any of these events, which to me was always opportunity. And now opportunity is going to mean something different to everybody else, and that's fine. And not everybody has to follow the same path. The opportunities I liked for conventions, whether I was working that convention or speaking at that convention or even just attending that convention, was to see things that maybe I've only heard about or I haven't got to see in a long time through like vendor booths or stuff, or to meet some of those people who've created arts and entertainment that I've loved or enjoyed or been inspired by, or brought me peace or solace at different times in my life, or just a good time. And then if you want to work in this space, you want to work in the industry, you want to work in the games industry, you want to work in a publishing industry, you want to work in a media industry, that's where everybody is. It's neat that technology through the internet and smartphones and all that sort of thing connects everybody. It makes the world a little bit smaller. There might be more walls put up sometimes, but it makes the world a little more small, right? But it doesn't replace literally going out to an event and meeting people face to face and having those person to person interactions and meetups with them. And that's something you can only do at those events, period. Nothing against streaming something and talking to people like that. Nothing against any of that. That stuff is wonderful and people enjoy that sort of thing. You enjoy watching this person on Instagram and they make all these funny videos and reels that you like. That's great. Enjoy it. But actually getting to go interact with those people is a whole different experience, and you're only going to get that at those conventions and stuff,
Yeah,
man.
I agree. Some of the conventions I can think of offhand, maybe you can fill in some blanks here if you think of one. Uh, let's start with conferences, which is the big one for our site, Events for Gamers. It's more formal, it's B2B mainly, but it has fantastic networking opportunities for you to get your start in the game industry and experience the knowledge that's just immense out there in games and even pop culture and some of these other things we're talking about. So go there if you want to network. It's in San Francisco. It's a conference every year in March. And there's other ones around the world like that. Moving on right from conferences, I can think of PAX, PAX West, PAX East. If you're an Australian, PAX Aus. There is Gen Con, which is a fantastic, more board game, tabletop focused event. And about a billion other events that are of like that. And
Slight exaggeration, but it feels
okay,
like
a
that in the
million.
summer, doesn't it? Yeah, okay. Well, and then I can think of like, I just flat say it. I miss E3.
And E3, of course.
I miss E3. I think it's a real shame that the events discontinued. Because to me, E3 is an example of what I was talking about. I wanted to make waves in that gaming space. So it was neat to go to E3 and see previews of upcoming games and products and consoles and all that. That was great. That's not why I went. I went because the whole industry was there. Period. You wanted to meet somebody in that industry, whether they were game developers, whether they're studio heads, even if they weren't in gaming and they were just mainstream celebrities, they would wander the halls there. I don't know how many times I'd run into somebody that was just there as an attendee that I liked watching on television, and it was, bump into them,
Well, you're a
network.
pretty,
So
tall kind of guy, 6 foot 20 or something like that, right?
no, yeah, four,
Okay,
six,
so you bump into
four.
a lot of people,
Well,
I'm sure, just to it's probably a great selling point.
oh no, it helps. It definitely helps. Well, that's something I learned in the wrestling business too. When I would go to E3 or San Diego Comic Con, stuff like that, I made sure that I kind of had a presence and a kind of a look to me. So you'd see me coming. I didn't want to just look like everybody else there because, I wanted an opportunity to strike up that conversation and maybe leaving enough of an impression to create other opportunities for myself, which I was pretty good at doing. I didn't choke and, go catatonic with any of those people. So, again, what happens once and you learn and you move on. But, that's the thing with those types of events. You mentioned the PAX events. It's wonderful, to go to these things because you can watch these people on Twitch and YouTube and stuff like that all the time. There's nothing wrong with that. It's wonderful. Enjoy it. But it's not the same as meeting these people and interacting with these people in person. And that whole dynamic, the friendships that can form, the networking and the opportunities that can come from it. That's where you want to go. That's where you need to go.
Yeah, I definitely recommend that for anybody looking to get in the game industry or any industry for that matter. Network. It's often missed opportunity.
Get up and do it in person. You could do more going around one event, shaking hands and having conversations and passing out business cards than you're going to do with 100,000 cold emails and sliding into DMs and popping into Twitch chat streams and stuff like that. I mean, you really can. You got to look at the quality over the quantity, man.
Yeah, quality over quantity. And if online is the only thing you can do, keep in mind the quality aspect. That is still very valuable. So, Scott, I wanted to ask you, what's next for Patrick Scott Patterson? What are you doing currently? What are you really looking to do in 2025 and beyond?
Well, right now, of course, last year I revived Hyperspace Arcade Repair after about a 12-year hiatus. Um, wasn't something I expected to do. It's something that I'd kicked around a little bit. My wife sometimes told me I need to kick a little harder. Here came opportunities, here came discussions sometimes. I didn't think when I would get back into that I would be as in demand with that as I am right now. Especially right now, as the time of recording this, should be my slower time of the year. Quarter four, October, November, December, that's the busy time. I knew that would be frantic. It didn't take a genius to figure out that would be frantic because people want these things up and running in time for their holiday gatherings and their Christmas parties and their corporate parties and all that sort of thing. I thought on the other side of the holidays, it's going to slow down a little bit. That's okay. No, it's not. I think I'm more booked up right now than I was at the peak of that season. So a big part of what I want to do right now is keep pace with that and see what I can grow and scale it into. But through all these different hats and all the different things we talked about, some of it, I've been a wrestler and I've been a writer and I've been worked at these conventions and all that. The one constant throughout everything that I've done is the television industry. It's always been part of it, from wrestling all the way through to what I'm doing now. When I can talk about the specific ones, the specific thing I got going right now, everyone's going to know about it. And it's very exciting. And it took a long time for of anything anywhere close to this to ever come to be. So I'm choosing my words carefully, so I'm stumbling a little bit because I don't want to let out any secrets or anything. But
well, then I will stop.
It's definitely something.
Okay, great.
Definitely
then
something.
I'll stop you there. Well, thanks again, Scott, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks everybody for watching and learning more about the 80s. Be sure to follow Scott's channels on Facebook and Instagram at OriginalPSP. You can subscribe to youtube.com/eventsforgamers for more upcoming podcasts just like this one with event special guests, industry leaders, and more. See y'all at the next event.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.